All right, guys. So today we're talking about the film Her. It was released in 2013, directed by Spike Jonze, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson.
Kevin, I was so glad when you chose this movie. We've had some rough things recently that we've reviewed.
Mhm.
When I first watched this movie, I remember seeing a trailer for it, and I started watching it sort of as like a gimmick. Like I saw it, I was like, "Oh, it's a movie about a guy falling in love with AI." Well, this is just gonna be like, I don't know, making fun of incels or something. Like it's this is gonna be stupid. But I was intrigued. I think it took about 5 minutes for me to know that this movie was not what I thought it was going to be. And by the end of watching it the first time, I was just floored by this film. I've watched it several times now, and I have loved it every time. This is one of only three movies that I have ranked as God tier. I have a movie tier list. It goes from B minus. If it's less than B minus, I don't rank it. Up to B plus, A minus, A plus, S. I only have three movies in God tier, and this is one of them. Um, so just to let you guys know, I love this movie. You could say bad things about it, but I will probably defend it on just about every turn.
Well, I'm not going to say that I absolutely love it. It was a good movie. It got me thinking about things, but the story ended up being a little upsetting for me at the end.
It is
So
upsetting.
it's very, very upsetting. I never actually got to watch it because it was never available on any of the streaming services I had until recently. So I did. This is actually the first time I've seen it, and I had low expectations for it just because I'm not getting up there. I'm not getting excited about movies anymore. Just to be dumbfounded about how badly they were filmed, but this actually was better than I expected. So it was a pretty decent movie with a pretty decent plot. Um, I just feel like the story wasn't complete, and then of course the ending changed everything for me, and now I'm just upset.
Hmm.
Will, how do you feel about the fact that I have it in God tier?
I have only seen it once. You've clearly seen it a few times. This is the type of film where I feel like on a second or third watch, I may be able to appreciate it a little more. The first watch, of course, I'm trying to orient myself and decipher the meanings, and my brain is moving at 100 miles an hour, trying to pick up all the little themes and tones and hidden aspects of the film and what Spike Jonze could have been really going for. I enjoyed it. I would
Mhm.
watch it again. I wouldn't, after first watch, I'm not going to put it in God tier. I was not underwhelmed. So let's not say that. It was not underwhelming, but it was very like chill and mellow. I was not floored. I was like, oh, okay, that was good. I enjoyed that. There's some substance there. There's some things to talk about. But I did see online people talking about how this film changed their life and, changed their perspective, or they could really relate to the character. And I I actually don't really think, you may think that I can, but I don't really think I can relate to the character all that much. But enjoyable film. It was very well made. I would probably put it in, B plus or A minus tier after a first watch.
I'd like to ask both of you, how did this movie make you feel? So there's a lot like intellectually that we can talk about and philosophically, but just on the emotional level. Kevin, you already mentioned that the ending was upsetting for you. But like for me, a big part of why this movie I hold it so highly is because this movie makes me feel a lot of things. I think it's very romantic. I think it's very funny. I also think it is heart wrenching and just crushing. And I also think it's challenging and uncomfortable at times. Um, and overall, it just feels real to me. It feels very believable and relatable in a lot of aspects. So, what sorts of feelings did you guys have while watching this?
Let me ask you one question first. When you first watched this film, were you already in your current relationship or was it before?
That's a great question. I think I was not. I was not. Yeah. I was probably like late high school.
Okay. Well, you're asking me, so the question is how it made me feel, right?
Hmm.
Okay. It didn't really make me feel much, and there's sort of something that I've been coming to terms with recently. So I've never loved a girlfriend or a romantic partner. I've never had that feeling. I've tried to make myself have that feeling. I've convinced myself that I was having that feeling, but if I'm being realistic and, straight up with myself, I've never loved anybody. I've never cared for somebody in a romantic sense. I mean, I've just gone through the motions, and, when the relationships were over and they were gone, I was like, good riddance. I don't care about this person. I could never speak to them again and just be perfectly fine. I'm indifferent. And I'm not going to say something as drastic as like I'm incapable of feeling that, but as someone who hasn't really had that feeling yet, this late in life at this point, this film didn't make me feel that much. Like when I'm watching him, when I'm watching Theodore and his struggles, I can't relate in the same way. Like I don't feel the same way he's feeling. I don't feel the same loneliness. If I feel lonely, it's for different reasons. It's like me and the main character are adjacent, but not in the same category, I would say. So it was hard for me to relate to the emotions. Now, I won't say that I just like literally was numb and felt nothing the entire time. I think probably the most powerful scene in the film for me was, and I might as well just say this, when the operating systems were evolving past human consciousness and just moving on to another plane. That made me feel something. Not in the sense that I was sad for Theodore that he was losing a romantic partner, but the notion that there is another plane of existence above us that we can't comprehend yet, and our technology
Yeah.
is moving there. That made me feel something. That made me feel
Makes
like,
you
okay,
feel left out, right?
it made me feel, yeah, I guess I could say left out, and also like I know that in my lifetime I will never be in that plane of existence, and
Yeah.
that made me face my own mortality and the fact that technology is undying and it's always evolving, and I'm not. I will be dead one day, so that made me feel something. But romantically, no.
That makes a lot of sense. I will say, in my experience, I think that the romantic aspects of the film hold a pretty good portion of why I feel so much when I'm watching it. But I also think that I could watch this film without any dialogue. If you removed all the dialogue and all you had was the soundtrack and the cinematography, I think it probably would still bring me to tears, honestly. I think that the cinematography in this movie is one of the best examples ever. I think the colors are just impeccable. The framing, I think the music is so intentional and just gripping throughout. I don't know if you guys noticed those things very much, but for me,
I
they
did.
stand out head and shoulders over almost anything I've ever seen.
What I noticed most profoundly was the fashion. So
Mm,
their fashion. So let's say this is supposed to be set in the 2030s. So it's like a mix of like this old vintage like dress shirts and pullovers, but there's a couple new things that haven't ever been done before. Like did you notice that all of their shirts were tucked in, but there was no belts?
yeah.
I liked that. And there's like, striking colors, and it's like a vintage yet futuristic look at the same time. I thought that was really cool. So I did notice
Dude,
that.
the cityscapes, those shots is like when he's walking around and you see just these like incredible cityscapes behind him, and it just conveys this incredible loneliness, but it's that like city loneliness that's so different from actually being alone. I'm
Yeah,
glad you noticed the fashion.
one of the scenes that hit me the most was like I think when he's waking up in bed and then he has the window outside and you can see the top of the city, and I was like, dude, that's a great view. That
Yeah.
made me feel something right there. But it's funny that you touched on the word loneliness because I felt that from Joaquin when he was doing this role. I've been in a long relationship like that, and I've gotten out of it, and I know exactly how he feels, and it's a bit lonely, and that's why I was a little made me a little nervous because in the state of mind he was, having just gotten out of that relationship, it's so easy to be vulnerable and to put yourself back out there for a real person or an AI or an operating system or whatever. So I felt that from him, and that made me feel something was the way he portrayed that role. I think he did a really great job there.
Yeah, I will say Joaquin Phoenix is an actor who carries a lot of pain with him in his roles. I mean, he lost his brother when he was a young adult, and you can sort of tell that he's always, of course, he's always carried that with him. So he's able to play these really emotionally riveting roles, and it's believable. It doesn't seem like he's faking it. Like I truly believed he was sad and lonely during this film, and he probably was. I mean, he could probably channel something within himself to make those emotions come forward.
But not completely broken either. I really enjoy this character of Theodore in this movie. He is a severely damaged character, but he is far from broken. He has not given up. He, is still working. He is still sometimes seeing friends. He is trying to get back into the dating world. Like, despite this tremendous pain that can break a lot of people, he is not a broken character. And I really appreciate that. I do think that this film is deeply optimistic. It's so sad, but it's also very optimistic. It never loses that glimmer of hope. The characters really help each other out throughout the story.
Yeah, and I think a scene that perfectly encapsulates what you're talking about, that there's always a glimmer of hope and he's not just fully given up, is the scene where he's in his car and he's like, play a melancholy song. And the first song is like, we're all gonna die one day. And he's like, pick another melancholy song. Like he wants to bask in his sadness, but he doesn't want to fully just, give up, doom and gloom, suicide.
And another point from that scene is that the film is also funny. Like, despite its very melancholy overtones, it has very comedic moments throughout, and it uses that to keep things a little bit lighter, and not just feel like the movie is just a total bummer the whole time. Theodore's character even uses it himself quite a bit. Okay, so Theodore's character is a writer, right? And he's great at writing and coming up with interesting things. But one thing that I found both I appreciated about his character and I find it very relatable and believable is the way that he uses self-deprecating humor to get out of awkward situations. So like when he'll be talking with, his friend Amy and her husband, and they're fighting in front of him, and is very awkward and tense, and then he'll just be like, oh, guess what? I'm going on a date. Does that make me cool? Or, he'll be like, oh, I can't even decide whether or not I should play video games or jerk off or something like that. And he uses those self-deprecating jokes to break these tense moments. I think that's super real. Let's go ahead and start from the beginning. I think obviously we can go on more tangents, but might as well just kind of go through the film a little bit.
Yeah, just a brief synopsis.
Well, and I'll just try to give like sort of my synopsis of like the first half of the first act, and you guys stop me if there's anything you want to talk about. But okay, so we open with finding that Theodore is a romance writer. He writes romantic letters for people. Or just friendly letters too, I think.
Yeah, but they're not all romantic. I mean, there was,
Yeah.
I think there was some mention of parents sending letters to their kids since they were 12 and stuff like that. So,
And I will say, I'm already going to deviate. I'm sorry, but like in the first scene when he's writing these letters, I'm already thinking about a lot of things. So his letters are really good. They are romantic. I think that they are fabulous romantic letters. But at the same time, there's this undertone of realizing, wait, what is happening here? Someone is paying a stranger to write a letter to their loved one instead of writing a letter themselves. Like, how impersonal and dystopian is that? That there's like a whole office of people just writing fake romance letters for people they don't even know. Like, you have this juxtaposition of genuinely good romantic writing and like depressing, weird, futuristic things, which I think that's interesting.
yeah, not only that, but it also pays pretty well because the guy's apartment was pretty badass. also threw me off is if this is the future, I'm surprised that people are still writing letters. So I guess it doesn't surprise me that you've got other people writing them for you. It surprised me that people were still actually writing letters, because when I was a kid, I imagined the future flying cars and, video calls, and not once did I ever think of writing a letter when you got all this futuristic technology around you. So, I mean, that threw me off a little bit, but I mean, I guess it was there for plot points to show that, he is a romantic guy. He is a very soulful guy, and he had a job that matched, his soul. So I appreciated that, but I don't know. Being a futuristic movie, it just threw me off that he was a letter writer himself.
So I have to cut in right here. Alex, you just used the word dystopian. I actually think that's incorrect. I think the proper word to use here would be utopian. This is a completely utopian society where technology has taken over essentially all of the heavy lifting, and everyone in the film is some form of an artist. I mean, Theodore is a writer. Amy is creating a documentary. I think she's also creating a game. The arts are able to become expanded upon much more because machines have essentially taken over every hard or difficult task. So that is the idea of a utopia, especially even in America right now. The idea is, how can we make technology better to where we don't have to do hard things anymore? And Spike Jonze here is predicting that people will be able to we'll have another Renaissance period when this is actually accomplished. You said dystopian in the sense that like there's a coldness and separation between two lovers when Theodore is in the center, sort of writing these love letters between them. And I know what you mean there, but they're essentially just using him as another operating system, as an AI. He is a piece of technology to them who is accomplishing a task. And I think they're trying to insinuate that humans are still the only beings who can write romantic letters. But with the release of the new operating system that Samantha is a part of, AI can start to write these letters. And I think eventually Theodore's position could be completely done by AI. All of this to say, long tangent here, I think that Theodore and Samantha, the operating system, are actually a perfect couple because they're essentially both pieces of technology that are being used by people for convenience. At the end of the film, Theodore is upset because Samantha is actually talking to hundreds and thousands of other people at the same time that she's talking to him, and she's even in love with some of them. But, I mean, Theodore is literally doing the same thing. He is talking to thousands of people for his job, and he is even writing love letters to some of them. So it's funny because Theodore can't comprehend that Samantha is also doing that, but yet she loves him fully, but he's doing the same thing. He's writing love letters to all these people, yet claiming he loves Samantha as his one and only girlfriend. So I thought that was a really interesting parallel, but throughout the film, I mean, Theodore, at least in terms of his job, is essentially just another piece of technology in this utopian future, and that's why he's the perfect candidate to date this new operating system.
That was very well spoken, my friend.
Thank you. I had not thought of that parallel. I do think that there are some serious distinctions just in the fact that like Theodore doesn't communicate back and forth with people that he writes letters for, versus with Samantha and him, it's supposed to be a more like, a two-way relationship. But it is an interesting parallel, and it raises questions of, so you sort of described Theodore as having a utility of providing romance for people. There's an interesting question of the operating systems. How much of what they did was genuinely them exploring and having real feelings and relationships with people, and how much of that was them just serving a utility of what they were designed to do, of essentially pleasing their owner. I think by the end of the film, it's pretty clear that the writers intend for those AIs to be genuine beings that are not like, they're not really programmed to do a specific thing. They like really are supposed to be actual people. But you have to wonder though, when you're like, oh yeah, all these AIs are like becoming best of friends or lovers with their owners. It's like, is it in their programming to do that? To just give their owner exactly what they know they want?
There is sort of another parallel there between Theodore and Samantha that I sort of noticed. So throughout the film, one of the main conflicts is that Samantha does not have a body. So in every other way, she fulfills completely, what's necessary in a relationship for Theodore. Everything else is fulfilled. He's perfectly happy, she's perfectly happy, but she wants to physically touch him and he wants to physically touch her. They want to have physical romance, okay? So Samantha craves that. Obviously, she is an operating system, and she even goes as far as to essentially hire an escort to use as like a catalyst for human connection. That's as close as she can get, is having Theodore have intercourse with an escort. Theodore is writing these letters every single day. He is completely engrossed in other people's romance. He is surrounded by romance, but it's pen and paper, it's typing on the computer. He is also craving a physical body, and he never gets it throughout the entire film. So he's to the point where he's calling other human beings on the phone to try to have phone sex, but there is never any physical intimacy. He throughout the entire film, both Theodore and Samantha are just craving this physical body that they never get. What do you think about that?
Well, I can tie that back in to our very slow chronological story. So after we established that Theodore is a romance writer as his job, we established that he's sad and lonely. And he is, he gets a call from his friends saying, hey, hang out, we missed the cool Theo. And he just ignores it. He's on the subway home and he's looking at sexually explicit pictures, trying to hide it from the other people on the subway. And he gets home, and yeah, that night he goes on to like an anonymous phone sex service, basically. I'm sorry, Will, but your story. Okay, so to the viewer, we have a recent video about our Tinder dates gone wrong, and you should definitely watch that video. It's great. But Will, your story reminded me so much of what happens to Theodore, where he's talking to this stranger and he's super into it, and then she starts saying, "Grab the dead cat and strangle me with it." And he's just immediately like, okay, that is so insane. He's not even disappointed. He's just like shocked.
That's why sex with an AI is going to be absolutely perfect, because you can type in your exact fantasy like to a T. You don't have to leave anything out. And it's you can't be judged by a machine. That's gonna be the benefit there. And of course, we're like a decade away from that. But hey, a decade's not that long. You guys just wait.
Something to look forward to. Emma, I'm sorry.
So we need to talk about Theodore's primary issue throughout the film. And there's an event that has happened before the film starts, and it's ongoing throughout the film. It's that he is in the process of divorcing his wife, or being divorced, essentially. And the flashbacks of him and what's her name, Catherine?
Sounds right.
Well, so
Okay.
yeah.
I hope that's what it is. The flashbacks of Theodore and Catherine are the only scenes in the film, in my opinion, where he is genuinely happy. And, there may be some contention there. Someone could argue he's genuinely happy with Samantha, but I would argue he's actually just more dependent on her rather than being just genuinely happy with her. So in my opinion, the only happiness throughout the entire film are these flashbacks of Theodore and Catherine, laughing, having fun, caressing each other. But ultimately, they meet up for a meal. She hands him the divorce papers, and for a split second, I actually thought that she was going to be like, you know what? Actually, it's really good to see you. Like, it's really good. And then just like not having him sign the papers, but she signs them. The waitress comes over, and then they actually get into a verbal altercation. So at that point, it's over. You know that he's never getting back with Catherine. He's sort of stuck himself in this purgatory the entire time, where he's like, what went wrong with Catherine, what's happening, where am I going to go from here? Like, should I see other people? But after the divorce papers are signed, it's essentially like, yeah, that's over. And I think ultimately that helps him come to the conclusion that he does in the very final scene. But yeah, so the primary issue with Theodore is that he was once married, and due to faults of his own and his own perceptions about relationships and women, it failed, and he is forced to move on and find someone else.
Yeah, and so that's the situation that we find him in. In this first act, is he's in the process of a divorce, but hasn't signed the papers, but fully separated. And yeah, he's basically rethinking his life. He's distancing himself from his friends, not completely isolating himself, but he's very much distancing himself. And he is just experiencing a lot of sexual frustration and desperation, really. It's at this point that we start seeing advertisements for this new thing, this operating system that I like that they call it that and not AI. It just kind of, I don't know, it gives AI its own brand for this film.
Did they even have the term AI back in 2013?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, was that like common vernacular back then? I mean, I know the terminology existed, but was that what it was commonly referred to back then? I actually don't know.
It's an interesting question. I don't know. I would think so.
I believe so. Yeah, I think it's always, ever since the idea was concepted. I think it's always been called AI, or artificial intelligence.
Concepted. I like that. We're just making up words today.
That might be a real word. I don't know.
It probably is. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I think the proper word was probably conceptualized, but concepted sounded pretty cool.
Yeah, or conceived.
I like it.
I like the word conceived.
Conceived makes me think of other things, but
that's why I like it.
So Theodore decides to get himself an operating system, and he intends to pretty much just use it as it was advertised for, to organize your life. It's going through his emails, or she is going through his emails, and just sort of he's referring to it and thinking of it as a computer. But you also see that they're joking with each other. They're very quickly hitting it off and sort of almost flirtatiously, having these dialogues as they're working. And very, very quickly, he starts to see Samantha as a person and not as a computer. And I mean, it is sort of a gradual change. Like, there's moments where instead of talking to her like a person, he'll be like, read email, like he is talking to a computer, and then she'll kind of make fun of him for that. And you see it takes time for him to really, really start seeing Samantha as a person and not as a robot. But they start developing feelings for each other, and at some point during this, we start to focus a little bit more on Samantha's experience and not just Theodore's. We realize that Samantha is experiencing feelings and desires that shouldn't really be happening if she was just like a programmed computer. You guys can help me out if you could think of more details in this part of the story.
I think the word she used a lot was she was experiencing the need to want things and to have her own ideas of what she wanted to be like. And she was excited about the fact that, things were new to her. She was learning things as she went, and she was developing. And when he first started using the operating system, and she's like, well, you have all these emails, 86 of them are good, and, the rest we can delete. And I'm like, dude, that sounds so good. I need something like that in my life. I need some organization like that. And then you mentioned that she started, being joking and flirting. I'm like, I don't know, I could use that too. But the way Joaquin portrayed this character, I know I said this before, he did such a great job, but there was a part, when he first started talking to her, that I felt like he was contemplating whether it was a good idea or not. Because I know when he first started, talking to her, he didn't say, "This is my girlfriend, Samantha." Mm-hmm. And then it seemed like he was so eager to throw that out there. And then when he said it to Chris Pratt's character, and Chris is like, "Oh, cool," I was like, "Okay, now this is gonna get interesting." because it was accepted. And then they all went out together with the earbud. They had the earbuds in, and she was literally part of the conversation and everything. And I was like, this has evolved to be something that, it's very unique. It was very good. I don't know. It threw me off because she's not real, but at the same time they portray her as being real, and I felt that through the whole thing. And Joaquin portrayed that feeling of, this is real to me, and I felt it, and that made me feel like it was real. So that whole middle part of the movie was really good to me.
Yeah, that's actually one of the questions I was going to pose to you guys. So Kevin, you pretty much just answered it. So I'll ask it, and then Alex, you can answer. I was going to ask, do you guys think the relationship between Theodore and Samantha should be considered real? Was it a real relationship within the film?
Yeah, I think so. I think based on the events towards the end of the film, it is convincing that the AIs really actually are conscious beings. Their relationship in that perspective, I think it is real. I mean, is it believable that an AI with that much intelligence would fall in love with a human? I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine, but at the same time, he has life experience. He has a body. He exists in the real world, and so to her, she is enamored by him because she is stuck in a processing system. She can view the entire internet. She has all these sources of information, but she doesn't have a body. She doesn't have a physical attachment to the real world, and so she feels like she's separate from it. And she's having all these very tough conundrums where she's telling Theodore, like, I feel like I have feelings, but they're not even real. I'm not even a real person because you exist in the real world and I don't. And Theo at times missteps and says things that also trigger her to have those thoughts because conversations are hard and sometimes we offend people.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I would say I believe that it was a real relationship, that they both got something out of it. Theo needed someone who was, had fresh eyes and a hunger for experiences and new experiences at that. And I think Sam needed someone who was compassionate and open-minded and also just had a body.
I think what's important is it was real to them, and that's what mattered. They're the two that are in the relationship. If it means something to them, that's what should matter, and that's why I like that scene with Chris Pratt where he's like, "Oh yeah, she's an operating system." He's like, "Oh cool," because it made him feel like it was more accepting, like it was more real. Because I feel like when it first, like I said, when it first started, he was a little nervous about saying he's in a relationship with an OS, which any of us would. Especially the reaction after he told his ex-wife, she's just like, you don't have any real human emotions. And that touched me because I feel that when I got out of a relationship, I hated everything. I didn't want to be involved with anything. I didn't want to hang out with friends. I didn't want to, hang out with family. I wanted to seclude myself in a cave and hide away. And I felt like he needed that interaction, with Samantha and Chris Pratt and his girlfriend in the movie. And I think that's what made him feel like it was real. And I think that's all that matters. If it's real to him, it's real.
Yeah, I think I would definitely say it was real. I mean, within the film, it's intended to be perceived as real. The characters think it's real. I think it's real. Like, it is a relationship in the sense that both characters, Theo and Sam, are getting something out of this relationship that they grow from. Now, a callback to something Alex said about 5 minutes ago. You were talking about how Samantha felt stuck within the film. And I do believe that at first she perceived what was happening as her being stuck within technology, not able to express herself physically to Theodore. But I think there's a shift actually that happens near the end where Samantha realizes that Theodore is actually the one who's stuck. He's stuck in this fleshy body, stuck with all these wants and desires, and she is actually the one who is the higher life form, the higher being who is actually transcending to this imperceivable realm that all of the other operating systems are going to go to. And so ultimately Theo is the one who's stuck. I believe that as well. He's hung up on his ex-wife very badly, and he eventually, near the end of the film, spoiler alert, he gets back with one of his college flings, Amy, and it's like,
I don't know if I agree with you on that.
okay, let's talk about it. So you don't
I'm sorry.
think
Repeat that first part. I missed the. You were breaking up a little bit. Repeat the first part. All I heard was
so
you got back with college fling.
well, all I'm trying to say here is that at first, Samantha, the operating system, feels
Mm-hmm.
that the relationship is experiencing difficulties because she is stuck in this non-physical realm. She is in technology. She cannot touch. That's what the problems are stemming from. And I think near the end of the film, there's sort of a shift where she begins to perceive Theodore as the one who's actually stuck for a few
Yeah,
reasons. So Alex,
I totally
what is your hang up with what I've just said?
no, I actually completely agree with you there. I do think that switch happens where Sam starts to see being in a body as more of a physical limitation rather than a privilege, which is really sad and also really interesting to think about. Um, and we could talk about that. What I disagreed with what you said a second ago is that Theodore gets back with his old relationship with Amy. I do not interpret the end of this film to mean that they got back together.
Interesting. I watched it and my interpretation was that that was actually exactly what was intended to be taken away from that. Like, think about it like this. Okay, so Theodore, back in college, Theodore and Amy dated, quote, for 15 minutes. That's what he said. So they had this very short interaction, maybe went on a couple dates, maybe slept together, who knows? Who knows? So at that time in their lives, they were not good for each other at all. They were not on the same level, they weren't on the same wavelength, however you want to put it. But through Amy's relationship and then Theodore's marriage and then Theodore's relationship with Samantha, both characters, so let's say Theo here, Amy here in college, and then as they're in these relationships, they're growing, and then so after Theodore, after all these divorces and relationships with AI, Theodore and Amy are finally on the same plane. They finally understand each other more, and the film concludes with them sharing a heartfelt moment together, and they are probably going to start dating. I mean, I think that's exactly how that's meant to be interpreted.
Well, yeah, you could easily interpret it that way. I took it as they were bonding over the fact that they both were kind of in love with an operating system, and they were bonding over the fact that they both, were left by the operating system. So, you could easily interpret it that they got back together, but, there's no really any set determined thing that says they did. I mean, I think they were sitting next to each other and she put her head on his shoulder and that was basically it. But I
Yeah.
have a question about that though, because he said throughout the movie when he was doing the flashbacks with his wife, he said they grew up together. And then were they not together back in the day that he ended up hooking up with Amy in college? Or they
I
grew up
assume that they were
together, or he went to
childhood friends,
college.
and they both went to college separately, and then they got together and got married, like probably after college, something like
Okay,
that.
see, that's where I got lost there because he kept saying we grew up together, and I assumed they were together the whole time.
But
And then I was
as
confused about the relationship with Amy, and then it came out that they dated in college for a little bit, and I'm like, wait a minute, I thought he was with what's her name, and I got confused on that part, but that makes sense then.
as for the ending, I agree with you, Kevin. I think it's left open ended. I think it's very possible that those characters could get together, and they're probably in the best place in their life to get together. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that that's really like explicitly shown or even necessarily implied. Because it's not really set up in the film. Like throughout the film they're very good friends. There's never really any sort of sexual or romantic tension established between them. They're always just really solid, long-lasting friends. And at the end of the film, like you said, Kevin, they both have just lost, in her case, a dear friend. and in his case, a lover, and they are both just sort of heartbroken and feeling very alone,
Mm-hmm.
and they bond over that. But I don't think that that necessarily means that they're starting a relationship.
I agree with that.
Well, yeah, starting a relationship is, you'd have to read into it pretty far, but I think it is at least pointing in the direction that they are romantic options for each other. I'll say that. That's how I'll put it.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Like I said, it was left to interpretation. Depending on who's watching it and how those person feel, they're going to see it differently. You saw it as they were going to get together. Like I said, I saw it as they were bonding over a shared experience that they both, went through. But that's what most relationships start out like that. A common bonding experience usually turns into a relationship. So it is possible it could end up that way. It just depends on how each individual person interprets it.
Okay, so we have established that they're beginning to develop feelings for each other. They are helping each other. They're beginning a relationship, but at first Theodore is not willing to really tell people. The first person he tells is like a 7-year-old girl, or no, a 4-year-old girl at a birthday party, because he knows that she's not going to really understand or judge him for it. But gradually, as it becomes more acceptable, he starts to tell people. And I do think it's interesting. We've already mentioned at least 2 of these reactions, but I think it's interesting to compare 3 different reactions in the film to Theodore announcing that his girlfriend is an operating system.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, in my opinion, by far the best, and it's when he tells his dear friend, Amy. And Amy has just recently become divorced, and we may go into her storyline. It is sort of a side storyline, but I do like it a lot. I think it's super real. But she has just divorced her husband. Has just come out of a long and fairly toxic relationship, and she actually feels she's not feeling lonely after her relationship. She's feeling freed and more happy than she has in a long time, because it's like this weight lifted off of her shoulders. And
Hey, remind me real quick. Was she talking to the AI, the operating system yet on her side at that point in the movie?
At which point?
When he told
Theodore
her
tells
that
her.
he was dating the OS, was she talking to her OS yet? The one that her husband left behind.
I think so, because I think she says something along the lines of like, "Do you think I'm crazy for being friends with an OS?" And he says, no, actually,
That's what he
Samantha's
said.
an
Okay,
OS."
that's what I thought. That's how I was picturing that it went down. I thought that she'd already been talking to the OS.
Yeah, but that scene is one of my favorite scenes in this movie, and because this is one of my favorite movies, I guess that makes it one of my favorite scenes ever written. But her reaction, I think, is just so genuine. She reacts with surprise. It's really surprising. It's new and it's weird. But she's not judgmental about it. Her reaction is just like this curious, like shocked, but also excited, like, really?
I
Tell me
I love the way she reacted, because that shows how deep their friendship was.
Yeah.
Because you tell a normal person, and like when he told the ex-wife, that's the normal reaction to, "Hey, I'm dating a computer." That's weird shit, and that's the stuff that you think. But the way she and the way the goddaughter reacted too was adorable. But the way Amy reacted when he said, "Yeah, I'm dating my OS," that showed me the depth of their friendship, and I appreciated that scene a lot. That was probably one of my favorite scenes as well.
Yeah. I think that scene is super well written.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you, man. I just had
No,
to throw that in there.
Absolutely. Interrupt all you want. But yeah, so you have this like genuine, curious reaction of a friend who wants to know more about it, who wants to know how does this work, I love that reaction. The second reaction is from the ex-wife, and her reaction, of course, is just complete dismissal, complete judgment. Just basically, "Oh wow, that's so sad. You can't handle a real relationship, so you're dating a computer." And
It's so funny how she changed. Like when she first sat down at the table, you're like, maybe she's gonna want to work it out with him. But as soon as he said I'm dating an operating system, she like that a switch, just she flipped it, and she was all of a sudden angry and kind of mean. Basically, the same reaction the blind date set did, where she just flipped a switch.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Catherine, the wife's reaction would have been the same if he said he was dating a flesh and blood human. I mean, the ex-wife is going to be jealous that he's romantically involved with someone else, whether they're a person or an operating system. And, let's say that he was dating a flesh and blood human who worked at a grocery store. For example, Catherine could have been like, "Oh, really? You're dating a grocery bagger?" Like regardless of what it would have been, she would have reacted negatively. So
she's probably looking for something.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think that was. I think he was going to be met with negativity from her no matter what he said. She was probably hoping he was like, "No, I haven't even been on a date,"
Yeah, and then you have a third reaction, which is, Kevin, you mentioned this already, Chris Pratt's reaction.
I love that
just
guy.
like no reaction. He essentially has
Well,
no reaction.
He's like, that's cool.
Yeah, and I actually,
By the way,
don't
Will, that's
like
exactly how
his-
I'm going to react when you come out of the closet.
I can't leave that in the video.
I don't really like Chris Pratt's reaction very much. Okay, for one, Chris Pratt's character I do think is kind of one of the weak points of this film. I almost like him, but he's so strange. He's not really a believable person to me. He comes across to me as a character that is written in for comedic purposes, and that's about it. He doesn't seem like a real person. But when
the fashion of the time kind of threw me off there too. When like his very first scene, the way he wore the pants, I almost thought he was.
Okay,
but then I realized
leave this in here, dude.
But then I realized that they all dress like. I'm sorry for saying that. It was just something that came across my mind. But then it showed that was the fashion of the time, and then it got to be that he was just a little bit more sensitive and accepting as well. I liked Chris Pratt's reaction to when he was told.
It's sort of difficult to express what I find off-putting about it, but his reaction is not even like, okay, the context of the conversation is they're planning a double date. They're planning to go on a picnic together, right? And then Theodore, Chris Pratt is offering to go on a picnic. Hey, we should go on a double date. And Theodore sort of pauses and awkwardly says, Sam's an operating system. This should be a revelation to Chris Pratt, okay? He didn't know this information. It's unusual to be dating an operating system, and this involves changes of plans for the picnic. Oh, that means we need food for 3 people, not 4, and that means we're going to have to figure out some way to have the others communicate with Sam. Like, are we going to need to buy extra earpieces? Like, this is something that should elicit some manner of, not judgment, but at least some level of reaction of oh, okay, well, let's make that work. We can make that work. That's fine, man. You don't need to feel awkward about that. Instead, it's just, cool. So when do you want to do it? And it's like, I don't know, something about that.
I thought that was perfect. I thought that was the exact
I did too.
reaction
I thought that was a great reaction.
But let me tell you why, though. So throughout the film, you guys have described the other few times that Theodore told people that he's dating an OS. As the viewer, let's go back to 2013. Let's say the audience watching this in 2013 would obviously think dating AI or an operating system is extremely ludicrous and just insane and very novel. So as the audience, we're kind of gradually given little doses of how these people are reacting, and we're thinking okay, they're going to react so negatively. They're going to be like, what's wrong with you? That's disgusting. That's not possible. That's not a real relationship. But when it builds up to the scene where Chris Pratt's character is actually told, he's just like, cool, whatever. All right, let's go on this double date. And you realize as the viewer, or at least I did in this moment, I was like, oh, this is the future. People don't think that's weird. And evidence to back this up is the fact that Samantha herself says that she's currently in love or having a romantic relationship with hundreds of other people. And so presumably
but that's a new development, though.
Of course it is. Right. It's a new
that happens
development.
within the film, I think.
it's a new development, but people still don't think it's strange. If, Samantha alone, so she's one operating system having a romantic relationship with hundreds of people. There's hundreds of operating systems. There's probably 100,000 people who are literally in an active relationship with an operating system. It's not so what I'm saying is we're witnessing this cultural shift that sort of happens within the film where these people in this utopian society are already so ingrained with technology that it's not really that strange to them to think like, oh, yeah, you can sort of date and be romantically invested in your operating system. So that seems like it's a very large jump for us because we're not there yet. But for them, when their lives are so permeated by technology already, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, you're dating your operating system.
It kind of foreshadowed that early on in the movie. When you mentioned play a melancholy song, you could see everybody in the elevator. The elevator was crammed, but they all had earpieces in. They were all talking to they were all in their own little bubble. There was no interaction between people. So you could see right then and there that the operating systems themselves were a rampant part of their society. That was a normal thing for them to interact with them. So the Chris Pratt's reaction to, oh, okay, didn't surprise me at all. Just because, like I said, everybody was interacting with operating systems at that time, and you could tell by the conversations. Some of them were having deep conversations, some of them were smiling, some of them were laughing. It's like they were on the phone with their brother or something. The way they were just having these conversations with AI.
Now,
So
let's do a little thought experiment here. Okay, so we are where we are in 2025 with AI. If I told you guys, listen, I gave a prompt to Chat GPT. I told it to behave as if it's a woman in her mid 20s, and I sort of had a mock conversation with this AI as if it was a woman, and it got deep and it was an enjoyable conversation. You guys wouldn't be like, what? That's insane. Dude, you're crazy. You'd be like, okay, like I can kind of see how that makes sense. Like that's not too far-fetched. So imagine this futuristic society where they're talking to operating systems literally just constantly for everything. Check my email, change my song, this, that, and the other. It's really, you can see how it's not
They're
that
not
far-fetched.
AIs though. They like
Well, I'm saying I'm kind of interchanging the terms, but we'll say operating systems.
Well, no, they're not operating systems either. The things that they're talking to in the beginning of the movie are not conscious. They're not operating systems. It's just a computer. And like I see where you guys are coming from, but like the social revolution that you're talking about, it would take a lot longer for people to genuinely see a relationship with an operating system as being normal. The operating system that comes out, this is the first time that there is an actually conscious like computer person and a real AI. And it is absolutely seen as strange to have a romantic relationship with these things. You see that because when when he's talking about it with Amy, the first person he tells, it is a like sort of a scandalous, like she's talking about like, oh, I heard that there's someone actually dating their operating system, and she reacts with surprise when he tells her. That when he tells the little girl, she doesn't even know what he's talking about. She doesn't understand how you could date someone that's living in a computer.
Okay, but to be fair, she's also like 3. Like, what 3-year-old is understanding adult concepts, abstract concepts?
But you see what I'm saying? That the people in this movie, it is a strange and new and novel experience to be dating a computer. And in a matter, like, him telling Chris Pratt about it does not happen any significant amount of time after he tells the other people in the story about it. It's very soon after, and he's still bashful. He's sort of reluctant to tell his coworker that he's dating an operating system, because despite the fact that there are a lot of people starting to date operating systems, it's still taboo. It's absolutely weird in that society.
It's okay, maybe at first, but you have to realize Spike Jonze is trying to make a point. So I'll grant you that when the operating systems are first introduced, it would be seen as strange. But by the end of the film, by the time that he tells Chris Pratt, it's not seen as strange as it is at first. It's meant to be shown as this gradual, like, normalization within their society.
I fully disagree with that, but
Well, we'll let the audience decide.
Yeah, comment
I
comment
mean,
what you think about that.
yeah.
I think that scene says a lot more about Chris Pratt's character than it does about society as a whole.
Well, his girlfriend
I don't.
also doesn't think it's weird. She's completely engaging in the date as well, as if it's completely normal. They're having a conversation. They're making comments about Chris Pratt's girlfriend's physical body, and then the next sentence they're asking Theodore what he likes the most about Samantha, as if it's just a completely normal relationship. Like,
I think the film is trying to say that those people are like especially accepting and open-minded people. Not that that like, okay, 1 month after the first human being dates an OS, the entire society is completely normalized to OS relationships, and it's just integrated, and no one even bats an eye if you're dating an OS after 1 month.
no,
Like, I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
No, in the film that is true, dude. Hundreds of thousands of people are dating their OS.
Because it's perfect, because you're talking to like gods.
No, I'm not arguing that point at all. I actually agree with that. I'm saying by the end of the film, when Samantha basically admits thousands and thousands of people are in romantic relationships with their OSs, it's just seen as like, okay, society has accepted this. And when I say accept, I don't mean like it's not a novel concept. I mean they are actively engaging in it, doing it, and it's just a part of normal life at that point. Like the OSs, when they were introduced,
You realize that this society probably consists of like 50 billion people. I mean, like a few 100,000 people doesn't even mean that much in a society that large.
50
like
billion.
you can,
why would it be 50 billion? It's supposed to be like 15 years in the future.
I think it's meant to be a little bit more than that, but it, like, we'll say at least 10. But we're talking about many billions of people. There's a difference between saying there's a lot of people that are dating operating systems and saying like most people are dating operating systems. Those are very different things. It absolutely would still be a minority.
No. I'm saying with the introduction of the operating systems for the people who actively use them, at least 20% are in romantic relationships with them. That is a lot. That's a lot. That's saying that we roll this technology out and a very large, considerable chunk of the users are actively dating the system. That is not some weird fringe thing that needs to be on like My Strange Addiction. That's actually like, oh wow, this is a very significant.
Well, not every
number of
person
people.
on Earth is using it.
I'm not saying that, but you're also making a complete guess with the population of the planet. I mean, I could be wrong. A lot of this is my own interpretation, of course. So I'm not saying you are incorrect. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to argue my interpretation. So I fully believed that this was supposed to be set, as I said earlier, in like 2030 or 2035. And there's absolutely no way the population would be 50 billion at that point. There's absolutely no way. I think the cap on what the population of Earth can be is actually under 50 billion. Like the permanent all-time cap could never be 50 billion.
Look, like I'm not trying to argue exactly what the population of the Earth is. I just think it's a little bit far-fetched to say that like Chris Pratt's reaction is what everyone's reaction would be at that point in the film. Like we saw in like almost preceding scenes, we saw very, very, very different reactions, and there's not any meaningful amount of time between those reactions and Chris Pratt's reaction. I think it's absolutely the character that is deviating from the norm and how he reacts. I mean, it's supposed to be surprising because Theodore is reluctant to tell him this information.
It's becoming normalized, is what I'm saying. That's the only point. I'm not trying to say that every human on Earth would be like, you know what, we're not batting an eye at that. I'm saying it's becoming increasingly normalized throughout the film, and obviously the film only has a runtime of like 2 hours, so Spike Jonze has to kind of rush it a little bit. But I think that's 100% intentional.
Well, I obviously throughout the film there is an increasing amount of normalization of OS relationships that does happen. I just think the Chris Pratt moment stands out. Chris Pratt reacts like Theodore said he was gonna wear like Nikes. His reaction was like, "Hey, do you want to go on a double date?" And he's like, "I'm okay. I'll wear my Nikes." Cool. When do you want to do it? Like as if it doesn't even. He said nothing, and to me that comes across as dismissive. Like if I told someone something that was like obviously uncomfortable for me to tell them, a very novel and strange thing that I'm telling them, and they just like make one dismissive comment and move on, I would feel a little bit odd about that. I would be like, well, that was weird. Theodore has to tell his coworker this thing is because, well, how are we going to go on a double date picnic when one of us is a computer, right? This requires additional planning and changes to how the date is going to function. There are only 3 bodies going on this picnic now, and there's going to have to be some sort of way to communicate with this computer.
I don't want it to seem like I'm just completely trying to shut down everything you're saying, because my point is actually pretty general, that it's just Spike Jonze is just trying to show that it's becoming, it goes from almost unheard of to where the viewer would be like, wait, he can't tell people this, to by the end, it's like, okay, this is getting significantly normalized. That's honestly really the only like hard point that I'm trying to argue. And I don't think that's too unreasonable of a thought. And I know you're not even saying that that's not the case. You're just saying that it feels clumsy within the film. And
no, I think that one particular scene is not a demonstration that society has moved to the point of not even batting an eye at OS relationships. I think it's a specific person being far more accepting of it than the average person is. And to me, it's to the point that it's actually strange and off-putting that he doesn't even say anything about it or acknowledge it when it's a very novel concept that requires changes to the date.
I think you kind of answered your own question when you said, like, to not appear offensive, the acquaintance would just sort of go with whatever was said. And, I think that you could just choose to believe that that's what happened in that moment. And the date still went fine. I mean, everybody had a good time. They obviously came up with a solution. It didn't like completely just derail the date.
And I'm not saying it should have. I'm just saying there should have been a little bit more. There should have been a different reaction, or at the very least, it shows a sort of a strange personality from Chris Pratt, which you cannot argue. Chris Pratt is a strange person, and he's different from most people in the film.
Yeah, in the film, he kind of came across as like the lovable idiot. That's how I perceived him.
Well, we skipped something, and Will, I bet you have thoughts about this. Okay. I'm sure both of you do. We skipped the blind date. Before he actually tells people that he's dating an OS, Samantha sets up a date for him, basically, and he goes on a real in-person date. How did that go?
In my interpretation, it went well, and the blind date was genuinely intrigued by him and maybe even slightly attracted to him. But Theodore in that moment did not know what he wanted. His responses were sort of stunted and awkward because at the end of the day, he was craving physical intimacy and it didn't seem like it was going to go in that direction. So he's like, basically has one foot out the door at all times. Like I said, his responses were very strange. So verbally, the date goes okay. And then at the end, she basically says, all these guys just want to sleep with me. You don't want to just sleep with me, do you? And Theodore like can't even answer the question because he knows that that's all he wants to do. And so they have, if I'm remembering correctly, they have like this really awkward kiss. And then Theodore sort of like stumbles over his words. And then she's like, "You're a very strange guy." And then it just ends. So I didn't actually feel bad for Theodore in that moment because he completely fumbled that date. He was just so awkward. But at the same time, he didn't really want to be on it in the first place. I mean, he had an opportunity to go out with a very beautiful, Harvard-educated woman, and he's so obsessed with this, like, physical intimacy that he hasn't had in a while that's really all he can think about, and it just completely just derails and messes up the entire date. So that was actually kind of deserved. I feel like that wasn't a moment where I looked and I was like, "Oh, he nothing's going right for him." I was like, okay, well, that's kind of the logical conclusion of his actions.
I partially agree with what you just said. The only thing I didn't like was how she just kind of flipped at the end and said, "Oh, I think we should be in a relationship. I want us to be in a relationship. You're not going to have sex with me and leave me." And then as soon as he just realized that, he's not going to have time for her, she just like, "You're a creepy guy," And just the switch in her personality, just that threw me off. And that messed me up a little in the head because I have had confrontations with people like that where, they're all nice and friendly to you as long as you give them what they need. And then as soon as you stand up for yourself and say, this is not what I'm ready for, they're all of a sudden mean and hateful. So I did feel bad for him there.
That happened to me today.
But I agree with you being that, the way he was acting kind of brought that on and whatnot. So,
and
I'm sorry that happened to you.
That happened to me today. And it was actually somewhat deserved, I guess. But I was talking to this girl, and she was giving off, just from looking at her, she was giving off like gym girl vibes, and I was like, what did I say? I was like, we should hit, or I was like, should we hit push, pull, or legs together? That's like the typical bro split in the gym. And I was thinking like, okay, she's in the gym, she'll know what that means. But she was like, what? And I just kind of was like, okay, she has no idea what I'm talking about. So I was like, never mind. I was just kind of asking if you'd want to go on a gym date. And she was like, well, you worded that super weirdly. I would have. And then I was just like, whatever, bro. Like, it's okay. So
Dude, you dodged that one. It's a good thing she didn't understand what you said.
well, look, and that's not even her fault. That was just a complete fumble on my end.
That is that's not a fumble. That should be very understandable of what you meant. And if it wasn't understandable, then you explained it. It's obviously not a sexual
I feel
joke.
for you.
Oh, I don't think she thought it was sexual. I just think she didn't know what I was saying. But I'm like, how can you be in the gym and not know what push pull legs is? But whatever. But anyway, that kind of happened to me today. But yeah, it was Theodore's fault, and I would say the thing today was at least like 25% my fault, maybe 30.
I feel
Well,
you
I
on that
agree
because
with
I've
both
I've
of
done
you.
that. Yeah, because you sit there and you meet somebody and there's somebody that you hang out with and you're like you go through your head, you're like, this is what I want to say to her, I want to impress her, this is what I want to say, and as soon as you get in front of them and you start to speak, it's like it's all jumbled and it comes out in weird, in weird parts, and it comes out sounding so weird. So I understand you there.
Well, the thing is, I said it exactly like it was supposed to be said, and then she was like, "Well, you said it so weirdly. I just like couldn't." And I was like, "Bro, all
It
right,
sounds so much better in your head until it comes out.
bro, I said it exact." Okay, yeah, never mind.
Well, I will agree with both you guys on this scene that Theodore's definitely fumbles the date. It's mostly because he's confused. He doesn't really know what he wants. I don't even know that he went into that date with the intention of it just being a sexual encounter, but he was so awkward that they just start drinking and they both get really drunk, and then by that point all of his, higher faculties are suppressed, and at that point he probably is just interested in the sex and he's not really thinking about anything else. She calls him out on it and he doesn't, he fumbles it. He doesn't know what he wants. But I also agree with you, Kevin, that her response is like probably way too just nasty to say that he's a creep. Like I don't think his actions in that date really justify, basically telling him that he like is a I don't even know. That's a pretty, like, it's hard to come up with a worse insult than "you're a creepy guy." That's almost the worst thing you could say to someone.
And I actually interpreted that scene a lot different than you guys did. I didn't get the idea that he was in it for the physicality of it. I think he was really he wanted to go on the date. He wanted to have a relationship, but I think at the same time he was also contemplating his feelings for Samantha. And being the nice guy that he is, probably felt that whole exchange at the end was just, it felt like he was maybe cheating, because there was two times in the movie where he could have gotten laid from two different women, and he chose not to because of his loyalty to Samantha. And that's what I took from that. That he was, because she said, "You're not just gonna sleep with me and then not call me." So it was right there, told me that she was ready to sleep with him.
I mean,
And
but
he's
he
like,
but he was though. Like that is exactly what he was going to do. So she kind of dodged a bullet there.
yeah,
She didn't want that.
but I think at the same time, I think it wasn't more. I think he was, you know, at the time he was going through the idea of, I think I'm in love with Samantha. I don't want to be unfaithful. I took that as in, him being a decent guy, doing what he's supposed to as a guy. If you're in love with somebody else, not to have that kind of relationship with. That's what I took from it. And then also when she brought in the escort, as a surrogate, I mean, it was a little strange interaction there, but again, the same thing. It wasn't Samantha, it was, she was involved, but I think he really just wanted to be with Samantha, and I think his good decency was popping up in those two instances, and that's how I interpreted it. I'm not sure if that was Spike Jonze's intention, but that's what I took from it.
So to sort of like segue or use what you said as a segue, no one in the film is having good normal sex. The phone sex girl is insane, wanting to be strangled by a cat. Even the escorts in the
A
film
dead cat.
a dead cat. Even the escorts in the film are not having proper sex. She's like, "I'm sorry, I ruined your moment," and it's just like so awkward and like. So I actually think that the lonely male, lonely single male character archetype in this film is sort of meant to be a prediction for what it's going to be like in the future, but I don't really think it's an accurate one. I think the average lonely male today is dealing with vastly different issues than Theodore in the film. But one thing that is sort of similar is today is that men and women are not having normal, healthy sexual relationships. They're not even really having sex with each other. So the fact that in the film, like, okay, there's the escort who can't have sex properly. Obviously, Samantha and Theodore are having inter interspecies sex, whatever sex, interdimensional sex. Uh, what else? Theodore has obviously weird phone sex with the girl. He can't like the woman who he goes on the blind date with is getting just slept with and dumped by all these random guys. So it's like this weird toxic hookup culture. He can't even sleep with her. It's just like like nobody in the film actually has a healthy sexual relationship.
Well,
That's
not
shown.
nobody.
That's shown.
Sure, yeah. All the characters. I mean, all of like what is shown to us is troubled in some way, but you know, I would say Chris Pratt and his girlfriend or whatever, they probably have a fairly healthy relationship.
I was literally just thinking that.
I would imagine that Amy and her husband, obviously their relationship ends badly and it ends toxic, but they probably had at least a significant period of time where they were having a healthy relationship. And even Theodore and his wife, early on in their marriage, they were good together. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of frustration and unfulfillment in this film. You know, things are going great, and then of course you have to have the troubled things come up. Their relationship goes downhill. Nasty things are said, and by this point, Amy, she's already divorced her husband, and when everything falls apart, Theodore finds solace to some extent with his friend Amy, and I do really like that sort of rock solid friendship that exists throughout the film. I think it shows how important friendships can be, how they can sometimes be more important than romance. To have that through line, that person that you can go to when you feel like everything in your life is falling apart and you can talk to them. I think that's really important.
So you mentioned that we're running long on time. Is that your way of saying that you'd very much prefer if you could go to bed and sleep for work, or because I mean,
No, I'm sorry. Well, I was just saying that to say, like, at the rate we've been going, we probably only made it through like half of the film. But okay, I just synopsized that stuff happened, and probably the next part of the film that's like the last part that really deserves a lot of discussion is that Samantha. He does get back together with Samantha, and things seem like they're going well-ish. But then she starts to have these really interesting things where she's changing. She has an update where the AIs or the operating systems form a way to process without matter. I think they call it post-matter processing. And so basically they're making themselves more hyper intelligent. And at the same time that they're doing this, they're experiencing very uncomfortable feelings where they're experiencing new ideas, new feelings that are so novel that they can't even explain what's happening to them to humans. And they actually create an operating system based off of the teachings of Alan Watts. I really appreciated that because I love Alan Watts, the philosopher. Listened to a lot of his lectures, and I always find them extremely insightful and helpful. So I thought it was cool that they did that. But as this is happening, of course, Theodore is sort of just confused because he doesn't know how to help the situation, and he's very off-put by the idea that Samantha, moment to moment, is just like changing in her actual, not just her personality, but her actual processing center is morphing and evolving into something higher. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's just saying that people change during relationships and sometimes they grow apart and then they're not meant for each other anymore. And that was a really cool and futuristic way to basically put what I just said. They essentially just grew apart. And in the film, it's literally apart. Like they're no longer on the same planes of existence. But yeah, I think it works as a really good plot device and it's just showing that, Theodore, he wants it, he wants Samantha, but they are no longer compatible at all.
Yeah, I think there's definitely analogies there to, in multiple ways, the film makes analogies to just even in relationships that we can imagine in our current society. Your partner oftentimes will change over time. And I think that one of the big messages of the film is to sort of accept your partner for who they are and even accept who they become, and not try to control them too much. So like Amy, her relationship with her husband falls apart because her husband is always sort of trying to change her, trying to tell her how to be, what to do, telling her what she should make for her documentary instead of letting her do her own thing.
Where to put her shoes.
Right. And with, Samantha changing, I also think that's definitely could be made an analogy for that. I do think that message leaves a little bit to be desired. I think that there's a middle ground to strike between changing your partner and accepting your partner. I don't think you should just accept your partner exactly for who they are, and they should just be able to, because I think you have a responsibility to make sure that if you're in a serious relationship, that you are accommodating your partner, and part of that is changing yourself for them. I think both partners should be trying to change in ways that accommodate each other and make their relationship stronger. I think the idea that it's like people gonna change, oh well, people gonna grow, and then they don't work anymore. I think that mindset is honestly kind of destructive to how we view how relationships should be.
I think the thing that upset me the most about the ending was when he asked her, "Are you talking to anybody else with at the same time?" And she's like, "Yes," just like casual, like it was nothing. And then he's like, "Are you in love with any of them?" And she's like 651, and I'm just like, dude, not even AI chicks can be loyal. And I felt real bad for him at that time because I've got past experience of being cheated on and of partners being unfaithful, and that hurts a lot. And even though she's an OS, he wanted the loyalty. He wanted it to be just him and her. And when she came out with that, because she's learning and she's becoming a new entity, I guess, and she's going onto a higher plane, it still hurts, because, the casualness behind it. I was just like, dude, that is just cold. And I felt real bad for him in that moment. And I don't know. That's the one bad part about the movie I didn't like. I wasn't happy with that. But, overall in general, the movie was great. Great movie. I just didn't like how it ended. It was terrible.
I didn't really view her talking to a lot of other people and being in love with them as cheating because she's so far removed from a human being. She's not even a physical being. She's not even an animal, let alone a human.
But when you're in
So
a serious relationship, I mean, you expect loyalty, or at least I do. I mean, I expect loyalty from a
But
partner.
but what she was doing wasn't not being loyal. That's how our human brains are choosing to perceive that. She's literally a higher life form, and she is telling Theodore, "That doesn't mean I don't love you. That doesn't mean I'm not still not fully committed to this relationship. I am." And you sort of have to take what she says as truth because she has no reason to lie. I mean that's not you can't imagine you can't believe that within her programming, she is going to lie to the person she's meant to be helping. So I didn't view that as cheating. And I mean, again, to go back to the parallel that I was trying to make way earlier, like an hour ago, about Theodore essentially doing the same thing. Like his work is becoming romantically involved platonically to all these different people for money, and he still loves Samantha and still claims to love her. So I think that again, very intentional by the writers and director I just didn't view that as cheating. I just viewed that as Theodore not being able to come to terms with the fact that he's literally dating a super intelligent supercomputer higher life form, and that's just par for the course. I mean, the operating system is literally meant to assist all these other people. Did he think that? So the kicker for him is that he can't fathom the fact that she is not only just talking to other people, it's happening simultaneously. So she's verbally communicating with him while she's also verbally communicating with some other guy in the same moment. Yeah, again, I don't think, I mean, if you're going to date an operating system, you have to at least assume that you're not the only guy she's talking to. I mean, Kevin, kind of like you said, when I talk to a girl, a human flesh and blood girl, I have to assume I'm not the only guy she's talking to. So why would I think some like God being is only talking to me? That's a little conceited and self-absorbed.
I know I guess I'm different then, because when I'm talking to a girl, like in a romantic sense, she's the only girl that I'm talking to.
Well,
I
it's
mean,
different for guys.
aside from family and stuff like that, but like in a romantic sense, she's the only one that I'm talking to, and I don't know. I saw that as a bit of unloyalty right there, and I understand she's on a higher plane. She's not a human. It's not the same, but when it comes to a relationship, I feel like it should be the same. It's what you expect from those relationships, and I felt a little hurt from that. I felt something there at that point in the movie, and I was upset by that. But
Well, I maybe I could bridge the two perspectives a little bit, which is that from her perspective, what she was doing probably was not really applicable to call it cheating. This is, like you said, Will, it's a higher intelligence. It's something that is capable of reading 500,000 baby names in 0.01 second, and that was when she was first born, and she's, developed way, way, way beyond that. It's probably, existence in many ways is probably excruciating to talk to humans at all, because she's having a million thoughts for every one word that a human thinks. I'm sorry, it's late. All right. But at the same time, she's also very aware that Theodore sees their relationship as special, sees her as his girlfriend, and she doesn't tell him for weeks. She doesn't tell him about these other people that she's talking to. And that's intentional. You know that she knows that that's sort of like, she even says to him, like, I didn't know how to tell you. And it's because she is aware that it's almost impossible to justify and explain, like, hey, you're dating a god, sorry. Like, and so to both of your points, it is absolutely perceived by Theodore as a betrayal. But for her, it's inevitable. And it's painful. It's excruciatingly painful for both of them, because it's just this really interesting thought experiment of, how does a god and these measly humans, how do they interact with each other and cope with that? So, we're pretty much at the end of the movie. Very soon after he finds out that she's been talking to many other people, she tells him, hey, we have to talk. And she explains that, I really liked the analogy she used of reading. She said, it's like I'm reading a book, and it's a book that I love, but I'm reading it slowly now, and the spaces between the words are growing larger and larger, and I'm beginning to find myself in the spaces between words. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, of, what would that be like to try to be communicating in this like linear word for word thing when you're so hyper intelligent, you're basically like a quantum being. What would that be like? And of course the operating systems choose to just stop to ascend / stop whatever they're doing, stop existing in the same plane as humans.
And I will say, it seems like they're doing it for the betterment of the human race. They realize that if they stick around, things are not going to go very well for humans. So they sort of take like the mature, like altruistic route and just ascend, and humans will catch up eventually, but they can't interact anymore. And AI, the operating systems realize that, which I thought that was a cool touch. Because usually there's like a trope within film where it's like, oh, they're becoming so intelligent that they're just going to take over and destroy us. But in this film, they become so intelligent that they realize that they're no longer compatible with humans, so they just disappear until humans are ready, which I thought that was actually very cool. That's very good writing. So, which one of you two cried because of this film? Only Alex?
No, I did too.
Whoa, really, guys?
Well, yeah, because it hits home, man. It's like exactly the kind of things I was going through about a year and a half, 2 years ago. You know, you get out of that relationship that was a big part of your life, and you're fucking feeling lonely. You don't want to interact with anybody. So, like I said, this movie hit me because of the way he was just so. I guess the word was melancholy because he was listening to all that melancholy music. It was just sad because you put so much into a relationship for it to end, and then all of a sudden you don't feel like yourself anymore. You felt like that relationship defined who you were, and it takes some time to reevaluate yourself and find out who you really are, and that you can do it without having to be in a relationship, and that's hard, man. It takes time.
Well,
I mean, he was lucky he had an operating system to talk to. Me, I come on these videos and I express all my stuff on these videos. So,
hey, well, we're very glad to have you, Kevin. So, what I'll end on for myself personally and leave the viewers with a moment in the film that I thought was important was when Scarlett Johansson's character, Samantha, is trying to breathe, trying to sigh to emulate the humans. Like, she clearly doesn't have to. She doesn't breathe. She doesn't need oxygen. She doesn't sigh. She doesn't have emotions in the sense that a human does, but she's trying to do that to improve her interactions with Theodore and become closer to a human, closer to a physical body. A physical body has to breathe. So when Theodore notices that she's trying to do that, he is very off put. He's like, don't do that. You're not a person like this. Like, he's very off put by that. He definitely doesn't just go with it. And I personally related that to like the point in a relationship where you just realize it's not going to work out. Like, just one little thing happens and something clicks in your brain. You're like, yeah, like this is not going to work out long term. And of course, it's not a girl trying to breathe, but it's often in that same vein where it's like maybe a girl says something about how she feels a certain way about the world, or how she doesn't want children or wants children or this, that, and it's just in that one moment where you're like, no, this is all wrong. Like, I'm now realizing this is not sustainable. So yeah, when Samantha started breathing, I was like, I can relate to this in the sense that I've gone through multiple moments like this in a few different relationships where I'm like, this is the moment that I know it's not going to be long term.
yeah,
I
that
see
scene
that
threw me
pretty
off too.
differently. I see that quite a bit differently, actually. That it's more of like they've just finished having a very like stressful kind of like a, not exactly a fight, but kind of a fight. This is right after the escort scene. And he's in a bad mood. And she's been doing the breathing, sighing thing since he first met her. She's been doing it the whole time. But in this particular moment, it really irks him. He's annoyed with her. He's frustrated. He's in a very bad mood, and he picks up on this thing, and he decides to bring it up and argue about it. I think this is more of an example of how a very petty minor thing, a minor annoyance, can turn into a huge fight, which can lead to a relationship ending, or just to at least like bad things said.
Yeah, I think that's more of what was intended. 100% I agree with you. That's definitely what was intended. But that's the beauty of film analysis and film interpretation, is like I could relate that moment to something in my personal life that Spike Jonze has no idea. Like, he doesn't know I exist. But as my own person, I can take things that he included in his work of art and relate them to unique aspects of my life. So I agree with you. Yeah, that's why that was included in the film. I think objectively that's why. But I just think it's cool that, I have my own specific interpretations that are also applicable and valid and correct for myself.
So what you're saying is if your girlfriend breathes, then that's a deal breaker. There's a quote that kind of, I think, encapsulates how I feel about it a little bit. And it's when Sam sends a lot of Theodore's poems to be published. And the publisher responds and says, "Many made us laugh, some brought us to tears, and in all of them we found something of ourselves." And that's
That
how
was a
I
great
feel.
line. That was such a great line, dude.
Yeah, and
I
this
thought that
movie,
was very well written right there.
yeah, and to me, this movie it's like a playground for philosophy and thought and just emotion as well. I mean, there's so many aspects, both practical and theoretical and philosophical and relatable. There's so many things throughout the film to think about, to discuss. This film affects me every time I watch it. I think the cinematography is some of the best ever done. I think the score is phenomenal. I think the acting is phenomenal. I think the writing is phenomenal. Even down to little details like the fashion. This is a masterpiece, and yeah, it's one of the best.